I'm not convinced that we know what their numbers represent. What does it mean when Maxine Waters can be chair of the Finance Committee? What does that mean when the man from Mississippi is head of Homeland Securities? Ada Bernice Johnson is head of technology, and when Ada Bernice speaks, Silicon Valley has to listen. She has subpoena power. When Maxine speaks, these banks have to listen. She has subpoena power. And I'm not sure we've stopped long enough to count, accept numbers, what it means to have 22 subcommittee chairs. And that's what our vote has done for us. Tonight we'll be having a dialogue one-on-one with the president of Microsoft. Then we'll have our social celebration. Tomorrow morning we're having the one-on-one dialogue with the president of CVS Aetna. It was deal with manufacturing, kind of what does that sector of our work mean. At noontime at minister's luncheon, Reverend Sharpton is presiding, and Reverend Aaron Cleaver from Kansas City is our speaker at that luncheon. Then there'll be an afternoon session on life beyond the playing field. Life beyond the playing field. We look at those athletes on the television for Super Bowl. 1/3 of them will not be back next year. They'll be out there in the NFL, replaced by younger, stronger cotton pickers. We've gone from picking cotton to picking balls. And cotton picking wasn't so bad. We could not grow in the textile industry. We could not grow vertically. You could pick cotton, but you couldn't own the field. Not the sacks, not bill it, not sell it, not turn it into textile and sell it around the world. So the cotton picking was not bad. So today we're picking footballs. If one of the kids at Ohio State or Clemson sells his uniform, he's kicked out of school. Say amen, somebody. Y'all with me so far? So that also what I want, part of what before Dr. Johnnetta comes and then Ron, working on this a kind of small group session there, even changing our language. How many of you remember your grandparents? Raise your hand. Great-grandparents. Great. See one hand. Great. Now, in the first chapter of Matthew, Jesus to David is 42 generations. 42, I didn't say it fast, I said 42 generations. It's 1,000 years from David to Jesus, and 2,000 from David to Moses. Jesus speaks to Moses and David and Isaiah as he spoke of yesterday's newspaper. It's a continuity of culture. So that 400 years, back in slavery time, no, slavery time is just 400 years. So slavery time is just 400 years old. We can put our arms around that. The last point I want to make on that line is that I hope that we'll begin here, as we've done so often, stop speaking about slaves. They are our ancestors. My great-great-grandmama was not, she may have been somebody say she was my great-great-grandmama. She's ancestor, relative. We have a subjective dimension to that system, right? Right? You think about Jewish people and their oppression, they're not Pharaoh's children, they're God's children. We have, the other part is on this Emancipation Proclamation. I've been to many intellectual groups, folks who've never read the Emancipation Proclamation. It's a document well worth reading and understanding and debating. It's more comprehensive than the 13th Amendment. If we had not won that war, wouldn't have been a 13th Amendment in the first place. To understand kind of what this language stuff means. And so I wanted to bring together Dr. Cole, who is an authentic scholar, and Ron Daniels, likewise a scholar who has devoted much of his life to Haitian liberation. To just have a conversation about 400-year journey. First, acknowledge that it is 400 years. So 400 years, 400 years. Matters. 400 years matters. What has happened in a 400-year time frame? I hear people saying in a trivial way, well, we're giving both the same boat now. That's insulting and so trivial. Some immigrants came on ocean liners. Some refugees came across the border. We came on slave ships, bought and sold on both continents. And so ours, we didn't come in the same boat. And we're still not in the same boat. Yeah. Among other things, because color remains the sin of the society. So, Dr. Cole, give us a bit about your view of the 400 years, and you run. Let's begin to talk about it. Dr. Cole?
My sisters and my brothers, my siblings, all, my kinfolk. Good morning, Sister President. Yes. Julianne Malveaux.
Malveaux.
My first words this morning in this incredibly important gathering are words of tribute to two amazing and grace-filled women. One, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, who many of you know was not only a champion for our people, but she also believed that we women folk had to show the way. In fact, it was Dr. Bethune who said, the real character of a race will be measured by their womanhood. You associate her, of course, with founding one of our historically black colleges, Bethune-Cookman. You associate her with being a member of the unofficial cabinet, the black cabinet of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I carry her in my heart because in 1935, she founded the National Council of Negro Women. And the other shero that I must uplift or lift up this morning is the incomparable Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, who indeed received from Dr. Bethune the charge to carry forth NCNW, the National Council of Negro Women. Dr. Height is often said she was there and never fully recognized among the great civil rights leaders. She may not have gotten her due, but she did what she had to do. And Dr. Height, for 50 years, led the National Council of Negro Women. I begin that way because you, my sisters and brothers, need to understand that being in this role, serving as the chair and the 7th president of NCNW, with my knowledge of these two great champions of civil and human rights, takes me to my knees. I don't want to ever cease to acknowledge those two women. I also want to say what a joy it is, and I would say it is an honor to serve in this capacity with the good attorney, Janice L. Mathis, who I call Sister E.D. She is the Sister Executive Director of NCNW. Now, because I know we are to have a conversation, I have only a few words to say. And I chose, Brother Rev, to put my words in a personal story, if I may. Because when Reverend Jackson says we got to stop talking about slaves, and remember, these are our people. Those were our ancestors. So let me tell you a quick personal story. Because we don't really grab a hold of the reality that 400 1,500 years ago. Our people, our mamas and daddies of centuries ago were treated as if they were not human beings. Let me quickly tell you the story of a 13-year-old girl. Born in 1793, her name was Anta Majidjanai Jai, and she came to carry the language of her so-called owner, Kingsley. She was Wolof, the largest ethnic community or group in Senegal. We know all of this, Brother Ron, because there are dissertations written about it, articles written about it, even a film now being made in Senegal. This 13-year-old girl is said to have come from a royal clan in Senegal of the Wolof people. She was literally captured like an animal is captured, hunted and captured, shackled, 13 years old, taken to Gorée Island, and stood there in those shackles, as I did one day, looking through the door of no return, seeing only the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. Anta Majidjanai Jai, shackled, enslaved, and taken to Havana, Cuba. But between Senegal and Cuba, can we stop forgetting what that was like? To be lined up as if we were sardines, without the decency of what to do with our waste. That middle passage, we must never forget that. When Anta finally is removed from that ship, this 13-year-old girl is put on something called an auction block. Now, I got to tell y'all, I love auctions, especially if it's got to do with buying African and African-American art. I'm into retail therapy. I mean, I love buying stuff. But how do we forget that we're talking about the buying of human beings, literally torn from their indigenous cultures, where they were not just people. They were farmers and fisher people. They were moms and dads. They were chiefs. They were glorious people. Some of whom were from a place that had the first university in the world. So don't tell me about I'm going all the way to nowhere called Timbuktu. Timbuktu is where the first university existed in the world.
That's right. Talk about it.
So there's Anta, shackled, now ready to be bid upon. A British slave owner by the name of Zephaniah Kingsley raised his hand and bought her. He was a strange man. This is during the time of the Spanish ownership of Florida. He wrote that slavery was all right as long as slaves were treated kindly. How you treat a slave kindly? But he had left his plantation, the Kingsley plantation. My husband, James David Staton Jr., who's here with me today, and I live today not far from that same plantation, which today is under the guardianship of the National Park Service. He swears he saw Anta and fell in love with her. I'm telling the story. He also said he wanted to marry her, which you could not do in Spanish-owned Florida. So he studied Wolof, and they married by Wolof custom. He had 4 such in Pip's common law wives. Now, I want to stop the story there because we got a lot of history in her story to hear. But allow me to go way forward now to tell you about my great-grandfather. When Brother Rev said, "Did you know your grandfather?" my hand shot up because I knew James Henry Lewis. When he said, "Did you know your great-grandfather?" my hand shot up because I knew Abraham Lincoln Lewis. And among the things I know about Abraham Lincoln Lewis is that he was a close friend of Mary McLeod Bethune. And when Abraham Lincoln Lewis died, who gave the eulogy at his funeral? Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. But back to the main story.
That's pretty main right there.
My great-grandfather, Abraham Lincoln Lewis, married the great-granddaughter of Anta Majijinai, Jai Kingsley, and Zephaniah Kingsley. As the black folks say in the church, my. But here is the final chapter of the story I leave you with. From being literally stolen from the only continent in the world from which all people have descended. And Brother Ron, the sooner white folk admit they're Africans, the better the world's going to be. The final part I want to tell you is what Abraham Lincoln did, because it's connected to the Wall Street Project. Abraham Lincoln Lewis, born in 1865, died in 1947. Barely out of enslavement. Born in Madison, Florida, had only a 3rd grade education. But look what faith and determination will do. In 1901, Abraham Lincoln Lewis, with 6 other black men. Remember now, Abraham Lincoln Lewis himself is barely out of slavery. He has married the great-granddaughter of 13-year-old Anta Majijinai Jai Kingsley. Abraham Lincoln Lewis with 6 other black men founded the Afro-American Life Insurance Company. And like Herndon in Atlanta, like our brother in North Carolina with North Carolina Mutual, those men all together founded the National Association of Insurance Companies. Abraham Lincoln Lewis went on, Brother Rev, to be Florida's first black millionaire. I didn't say I did that wrongly. I didn't say it correctly. He, yes, became Florida's first black millionaire, but he founded the first insurance company in the state of Florida, not the first black insurance company. So my question to us is, what do we have to do? First, to stop having amnesia about what happened 400 years ago. Yes, I can get it that white America does not want to remember what happened 400 years ago. But how dare we not do so? My second question, this is the prof coming out in me. My second question is, what do we learn from this story I've told you? Especially about a man and a woman, Anta and A.L. Lewis, who also, by the way, founded American Beach in 1935 because he said black people had the right to recreation without discrimination and humiliation. What do we learn about black entrepreneurship? And then finally, what do we remember about the way, you remember because I'm not going to tell you so you can remember, that Abraham Lincoln Lewis was not only a race man, he was a true race man who believed in his people, who believed in service, who believed that he was put on earth to make things somehow a little bit better than he found them. I'm so thankful that you would listen to my story of my ancestors, connected with yours, and then figure out what we're going to do not only to remember our ancestors, but to prepare a better way for our children, our grandchildren, those who haven't even been imagined yet. Thank you.
I want to man, what a story. You know, amnesia, assume you forgot. Ignorance you never knew. And if our Sunday school classes don't teach it, and our colleges black colleges don't teach it, we will not know. How can they know unless the people tell them? How can the students learn unless the teacher teaches? And so what we're trying to open up now is a whole new process, Julianne. The other thing, the first white man convicted for raping a black woman was in the 1950s. I'm trying to get this precise date tied down. Look at our skin complexions in this room. Look at our skin complexions. We're two or three generations deep, sometimes one generation deep from the slave master being our father, deadbeat dads. Just look around now, look around. None of us got off the boat looking this way. And so it is that the whole idea of black women being used as, in Japan they call them comfort women. The Japanese conquered the Koreans, and they would take them and use them for comfort women and exploit them. Our mothers, foremothers, were comfort women for, as in the Strom Thurmond case, Miss Washington down in South Carolina. For the 18, 19-year-old white kid, the black woman was his comfort. It was his sex right, and you could not sue for rape. Only people could sue for rape. We were not considered people. Neither in slavery nor in Jim Crow. So 350 years of rape without conviction is a part of our, as we get deeper into it, and this is going to really require some yoga, meditation, some reading to get deeper into the process. When you think about Jesus, 42 years, 4th generation from David, and they didn't have Google. Hear me, somebody. So we have the capacity today in the registrars of the South to find out what boat we were on, and what land and place we came from. I wanted Dr. Ron to be here because he's been so deep, so obsessed, magnificently so, with Haiti. When Trump says it's an asshole Haiti and South and Africa, that's his ignorance, but ours too, because many people didn't even insult them, because we look down on Haiti too. So look down on Haiti, look down. You said, Ron, speak to us about as you see for your journey.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's so good to be with all you beautiful black people and friends, all right? And I'm a little discombobulated, actually, because what Dr. Cole just laid on us. I'm ready to say amen and go home, right? But first and foremost, I want to, I'll put it all together. I'm really so happy and delighted that she started, because if she didn't, I was, with the National Council of Negro Women and the history of Mary McLeod Bethune and the legacy of this great organization, and that Janet Mathis is now the executive director, president, and CEO of that organization. And I hope we can really build some bridges, because it is an organization that, as I discovered, does an incredible, there's a whole lot of people talking about Pan-Africanism. And even though it has the name, and some of us bristled a little bit, National Council of Negro Women, sometimes you have to go to the essence of the thing and not the name of the thing.
That's right.
Because the National Council of Negro Women had programs all over the African continent doing serious work when Negroes over here were talking about it.
That's right.
So the National Organization, National Council of Negro Women, is a formidable organization, and Dorothy Height, one of the most incredible leaders, not just women, leaders of our time. So I just wanted to just say that. And again, Dr. Johnnetta Cole,
Yes.
Lord have mercy. What a figure she has been, what a contribution she has made. And I just wanted to give that a shout out as well. Got to give a holler out to Dr. Julianne Malvo, who is also on the National African American Reparations Commission. And I say that deliberately because we have to talk about reparatory justice. And delighted that Reverend Jackson started this way, but I also, and I just gave her a personal shout out, Attorney Barbara Arnwine.
Oh boy.
And I say that because history, we're talking about amnesia. We have young brothers and sisters who don't even know, who may not even know Martin Luther King. Now everybody does know that, but I'm saying, but there is so much more. And what her organization is doing is every day I get a hit telling me about some notable woman or man in the history of black people in this country. That is so incredibly important. Let's give her a round of applause for that contribution. And quickly, let me just say before I do my rapid speak thing, and really Haiti is there, but really not going to talk a great deal about Haiti. I just have to say, too, about Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. Because Reverend Jackson is, and we used to talk about this in the campaign, he used to laugh about it, he's an authentic genius. It will take years to unpack the contribution that this giant has made, not only to the liberation of black people, but to all humankind. He has no peer in terms of his mastery of public policy and connecting it to the struggles of our people. He instilled just as clear his analysis, and he has the genius of being able to take complex ideas and reduce them to a way that we can understand it. So everybody can't do that, and particularly in the academy, we get up all pedantic and running out. He can reduce it to things that you can grab it, and so I couldn't find my copy, but the policy manual from the 1988 campaign ought to be the Bible, or at least ought to be required reading for every progressive. That policy, 1988, the policy manual from the Jesse Jackson campaign ought to be the manual for every progressive. And I say that because there's a way in which people forget. You know, Roy Jones one time had a fight. I'm doing the boxing thing, and Roy Jones was, in his heyday, was a bad boxer. And something happened, and he had a draw with somebody, and then he came back and he defeated the opponent and did it brilliantly. And when they stepped to him, they said, "How did you?" He said, "You must have forgot." Problem is, we must have forgot how incredibly important the Jesse Jackson for President's campaigns in 84 and 88 and the Rainbow Coalition was to the trajectory of the progressive movement in this country, including the election of the first black president, Barack Hussein Obama. Let's give it up for Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Yes.
Now, quickly, let me just, as I weave through and think about what I would say today, and Reverend, I'm so delighted you started this way, because tomorrow, February 21st, is the 53rd anniversary of the martyrdom of El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X. And I say that as you are noting the fact that some people have not reflected on the 400 years, or sometimes people, we also forget El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz. Tomorrow is the 53rd anniversary of his martyrdom. And so I want to dedicate my words to him, and I also want to use some of his thoughts for framing my comments. And they will fit right in. Because and let me just say, Ossie Davis called him our black shining prince, right? Our black shining prince. One of the things he said was, of all of our studies, history is most qualified to reward all research. That's what we've been talking about. This is El-Haj Malik. This is Malcolm. This is the brother who had no degree, who went to prison because he was a petty, whatever, got in, just like a whole lot of brothers and sisters today, and captured in the criminal justice system. But he turned prison into a university, read every word in the dictionary, read every book in the library. So he emerged, not talking about realness in relationship to our oppression, but dedicated to transforming our people. So Malcolm said, of all of our studies, history is most qualified to reward all research. In that regard, he said, if you can study how other people got their freedom, we may be able to determine how we can get our freedom. But he also said something else. He said, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us, right? And so as Dr. Cole was laying out, we have to really know this history. It's painful. So even those of us in this room, sometimes we would rather not have to deal with it, because it is painful. But unless we can do the whole Sankofa proposition, deal with the Ma'afa, go back and look at it in terms of the door coming forward, we will not heal ourselves and be capable really of doing the kind of liberative, transformative movements that we need in the 21st century. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on. We didn't come here voluntarily. We were snatched and brought here. So I won't repeat what Dr. Cole said. She's already talked to us about the middle passage. She's already talked to us about that we were not slaves. We are the givers of life and civilization. We are the world's first people. We don't say that in an arrogant, chauvinist way. We just have to counter Arnold Toynbee, who said, of all the races of humankind, only the African has contributed nothing to human civilization. So we just want to level the playing field. So people have an understanding. Yes, the University of Timbuktu, first university when others were, in fact, not even close to creating a university. We don't say that. It's just a matter of historical fact, right? Not to mention Imhotep, not to mention the people who built the pyramids, not to mention the father of medicine, 3,000 years before Hippocrates, all those things. These are things that our children need to know, that we need to be reminded of. Of all of our studies, history is most qualified to reward our research. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us. The other thing Malcolm said was the greatest crime committed by Europeans against Africans was to take our names. And he didn't mean that necessarily literally. He made, and this is something we really need to study more carefully. He was talking about a phenomenon I would call cultural aggression. Because of all the African people, we, the Africans in America, not only suffered the brutality, the physical brutality, we suffered the brutality of the de-Africanization process. I see Dr. Blakeney in the audience. I was mentored by Queen Mother Moore on these questions. Let me just say that again. The phenomenon of cultural aggression. Only in this country, nowhere else. You can go to Brazil, people speaking pure Yoruba. You can go to Cuba, people, because there was a continuity. There was no effort in those places, as brutal as slavery was, to de-Africanize the African. Our color was a badge of degradation. Our African heritage tainted us. They beat us and said we could not speak our languages, practice our religion, or even play our musical instruments. That was a process of really and not only that, did not want too many people of the same ethnic group on the same plantation. Only in America was there something called chattel law. There was a whole body of law developed to regulate this unique form of property, reduced to less than a human being. Now what that means is, quickly, is, if you understand what the phenomenon is, here we are from different ethnic groups. They did not want us to come together because they knew that if we could speak the same language, if we could take the musical instruments, they knew that we could what? Resist more effectively. So therefore they scattered us. Because ethnicity is more important than skin color. Culture is more important than skin color. If you're Yoruba, Hausa, all these different ethnic groups, yes, they're all Africans, but their ethnicity is important. It is what has them cohere. That's what culture is. Culture is the stuff that make a people stick. If you, in fact, attack culture, people become unstuck. And so really the miracle of Africans in America is out of that phenomenon. Somehow we came together to create a new African community in this country. That's the positive story, if you will. Because when you look at it, here we are, we're trying to figure this out. And we did figure it out, by the way. So you look at the Negro spirituals. What is that, right? Here we are finding the ingenious ability, the kuumba, if you will, to be right up in the white slave master's face, singing those spirituals, he not knowing what we're talking about when we say, before I be a slave, when we're saying, I'm going to steal away to Jesus. We knew what we were talking about. Mastering right up in his face, knowing what we were talking about. So they didn't beat it all out of us, and we still used our musical instrument. We interpreted the religion in a different way. They were trying to give us the verses that said we should be docile. Almost every slave revolt was led by a person who had a spiritual epiphany, like Nat Turner. All of them were spiritual people. But their God, the God that they served, was like Boukman. We want to talk about the Haitian Revolution. We talk about Toussaint Louverture. We should be talking about Boukman. Because Boukman was the spiritual leader. And when you hear his prayer, he said, I don't understand the white man's God. I pray to the African God. The African God is a God of righteousness, a God of justice, if you will. And so it was that, yes, it was great to have the general Toussaint and Dessalines and all of those generals. It was great to have them, but what really propelled the Haitian Revolution was the spiritual power of a people who had been emancipated, because Boukman said, they cannot kill us. So they came in wave after wave after wave, because they said, before I be a slave, Metaphorically, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Bookman. And so that power, that spiritual, cultural power, is a part of what made us. And so when we start talking about how we made it, look at what we did. We built institutions. I'll just take Richard Allen and Absalom Jones as an example. Black people coming together from a disparate people with all of this oppression and still building those institutions. And out of the black church in particular, institutions that grew. And we could talk about them for a long, long, long time. My grandfather is buried in Mutual Aid Cemetery in Georgia. And when they told the story about it, they said, well, it's because the black people got together and they would put their money together. Yes. And they created mutual aid societies. Yes. Well, Richard Allen had already created mutual aid societies. Out of those mutual aid societies came the black insurance companies and all those things came out of, in fact, this experience. So I just wanted to talk about that quickly because Malcolm X, but this issue of cultural regression is difficult because it's still something that we still grapple with. And so we came from being the African Methodist Episcopal Church, then we became colored, then we became Negro. We are still struggling with the sense of who we are. And Reverend Jackson, you may not recall, but on this critical question, and Malcolm talked about it too, because Malcolm always talked about at least being Afro-Americans. He was never really afraid of this whole notion of being African, but when we came up, nobody wanted to be African because it was all about Jungle Jim and Tarzan and all that stuff. And then you had Nipsey Russell, the comedian, saying that, well, we didn't leave nothing in Africa. And Malcolm said, well, you lost your mind in Africa. Hello. It was Reverend Jackson at a press conference you had in Chicago. You may not remember when you rose and said, you said African American. Give us a sense not only of our blackness, because Queen Mother Moore would say, where is black land? You have other people coming from Ireland and France and Poland and so forth. She would say to me, where is Negro land? Where is black land? Black is necessary, but it's not sufficient to identify who we are. We are an African people because African is the land of our origin. Just because a cat has kittens in the oven does not make them biscuits.
That's the Queen Mother Mooreism.
Queen Mother Moore.
That's her stuff.
Let me just quickly close now because I don't want to go too long. Let me just quickly finish up real quick now. Because it is a story filled with tensions and contradictions, which is why we're still struggling, which is why I appreciate the way we're starting this session, because we cannot have amnesia. We can never, ever reach our full potential unless we address the internal contradictions that we face in terms of our identity, not only in some sentimental sense, but in a functional sense, if you will. So Malcolm X also said he was a black nationalist. That's right, a black nationalist. Black. Let me say that again, because now here lately we get nervous about black. I'm talking to people and they say, well, people of color are moving in large numbers back to North Carolina. I said, you mean Latinos are moving back there? I mean Asian? We be talking about us and we be saying people of color. No, we are still black people. We're African. We're people of African descent. We should not be slipping back into kind of being nervous about that, right? That's who we are. That does not mean we are in opposition to anybody else, because our whole history has been, in terms of that we are for all people. Our history has been one of being for ourselves, but also being righteously against the oppression of all human beings. Malcolm X said that he was a black nationalist. And in that sense, what he was talking about was controlling the politics and the economics of our communities. Now, that's where we have a challenge today, because we are old folks to say, showing what we want to be, showing what we're going to be, we're showing what we were, but we still have some major challenges. Because we still have not sufficiently mastered the $1.2 trillion that is in our hands. And while we, in fact, need to use it in part as an instrument to confront Wall Street and corporate capital, because they owe us, that they need to reinvest in our communities. But unless we have the cultural consciousness, we will not confront Wall Street. We will not have the movements that will say to them, you cannot use our money without putting people in positions of power. You cannot be in this. And what they will do is, when the movement is low, as I heard the question raised this morning, then they slip back. They're waiting for us to just, well, them Negroes ain't going to last long. You know, they'll be there for a minute and then they'll slide back. And so in the boardrooms, in the cultural diversity programs, that was the time you could go and you could get these grants and you can get these various things. But now that's slipping now. Why? Because our movement is not as strong as it would. Because a part of it is, it's not only being in the corporate suites and in the boardrooms and in the Congress. You have to be in the streets. You have to be able to use economic sanctions. You have to be able to use boycotts. It is freedom, as Malcolm said, by any means necessary. And we're a little scared of that now because we know we're doing a little better than we used to do now. So we don't really want to go out there and confront. We have enough dollars in our hands, and Dr. King talked about this in his final speech. We have enough power in our own hands to bring corporate America to its knees. And so there should not be a scenario where Bennett College or any black college is in fact suffering. I'm glad that the $8 billion, $9 million was raised. But, you know, to be honest about it, all of that money in its totality could have come in from black America. It should have come from black America. And what we're facing now is we have to now, the reality is the penetration of the Koch brothers. United Negro College Fund, the National Negro, the NNPA, all this, now we have knocking on the door of the Koch, we know what they're about. Right. Now, I can criticize them, and I should, but on the other hand, you know, black bank suffering and all these kind of things. That is still because of the cultural question. Karinga said that. We have to be about understanding who we are and acting on that, not sentimentally, but because we know who we are, we will support our own institutions. Yes, sir. And so let me close now by also saying that a part of this is this economic power, this fourth chapter that Reverend Jackson has been on, the genius of Reverend Jackson, that fourth chapter is the chapter. But somehow or another, if we have athletes getting ready to sign Supermax and Supermax contracts. Actually, an $8 million contribution was a tax deduction, if properly understood. Because it's really about, and Dr. Cole used the term race man, race woman. It's about being of the race and for the race. We have a whole lot of people who are cosmetically black. I mean, we all look alike. It's one thing to be cosmetically black. It's another thing to be authentically black. And by that I mean to be of the race and for the race, to use our resources, time and resources to support each other, not in contradiction to anybody else, but charity begins at home and spreads abroad. Love thy neighbor as thyself. This is the first proposition. And so we need to be in a situation where in fact, that consciousness in black America is helping to undergird our institutions. And then we are also simultaneously going to Wall Street and these people saying, you owe us. And by the way, it's also about reparations as well. We have got to be paid for the work that we did. We built, our labor built this country. And it's not just what happened in slavery, it's all the exclusionary policies after that. In Memphis, Tennessee, the same people who owned the slaves now they are the power elite in Memphis, Tennessee. Right. They've never paid. We need to be on their case. You owe us. Not me. I don't want a check. It's the collective corporate nation of black people, if you will, that needs to be paid. Finally, our mind. I've written an article. You can go to the website, ibw21.org, to look at it. It's entitled, The Year Africa Diaspora Rising, the Year of the Door of Return to Africa. 400 years since the arrival of indentured Africans in Jamestown. And by the way, we have to understand, that's not the first time we were here, by the way. We came before Columbus. Ivan Van Sertima has made it clear. And by the way, there's nowhere, anywhere in the world that we have not been, if you correctly understand history. We found out all over the Wee Valley in China, the Indus Valley, everywhere you find black people from Africa spread everywhere, including this country. So we were here before Columbus. But this time we came on these ships to Jamestown, right? And they came by way of the door of no return eventually from Goree Island and from the castles of El Albina, right? But now it is time for us to go back through those doors to connect with the wealthiest continent on the face of the earth. Hear me now. Du Bois put it out, Africa is the richest continent on the face of the earth. The richest continent, barring none. And God has given us, Reverend Jackson, he's given us the richest continent. I mean, they've exploited it and exploited it and exploited it. And there's still so much we can't even get our minds around how rich Africa is. And so it's now for us to get our minds right, to return to Africa, not physically, but to make the connections as Garvey would have had us do, to build those economic relationships. There is no reason why any African person in the world should be suffering when we are and have the potential to be in control of the richest continent on the face of the earth. And what that means is, by the way, we have to be critical of our own leadership. We have to have the audacity to be critical of our own leadership. Africa is in part suffering because, yes, the imperialist system, yes, capitalism, we expect that. They're not going to just turn over. But as Gabral said, we must also learn to struggle against our own weaknesses, and we are really we're hesitant to do that. Dr. Betty Shabazz once said, we may be oppressed, but we do not have to cooperate with our oppressors. I'm going to be just plain. There's too much going on in these on the African continent, and even here, where all too often the resources of Africa are being given away, squandered. And in fact, people putting the money in their pocket by the millions of dollars that should be used for the development of black people. Yes, I said it. And we have to correct it. And there's a new generation of young Africans rising who are going to correct that, to make sure that the vision that we had for Pan-Africanism will be realized, because none of us envisioned just putting black people in the places where white folks was. That was not the struggle. The struggle is, in fact, a liberative struggle to make sure that that African people and all of humankind eventually does not suffer because of the resources we have, and because we are righteous people, we are good people, we are visionary, courageous people. And so we go back through that door of return this year with our heads up high. We're battered, we're bruised, we've come across some difficult times, but we are going to prevail because God is in us, the Spirit is in us, our culture is in us, and we are a mighty, mighty people. Ending with Garvey, who said, "Up, you mighty race. You can accomplish what you will."
Let me, I want to start by saying ignorance is no friend of those struggling for liberation. See, ignorance cannot be an ally of people seeking freedom.
People seeking freedom.
Now, I want to read just one page of a two-pager. I want everybody to have a copy of it. Go ahead and get up. Let me get up.
Ready now.
You okay?
Yeah. Since we're on Wall Street, August 2019 will mark the 4th anniversary of the first documented African slaves documented. Forced arrival on the shores of what would become the U.S. of America. Wall Street took full advantage of this human suffering. We blame it all on Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. In 1711, the New York City Common Council made Wall Street the city's official market for sale and rental of enslaved Africans, 1711. Africans enslaved in America, men, women, and children, became some of the first commodities traded on the exchange. We were the commodity on the commodity exchange. We were commodities. The very name Wall Street was conceived during slavery, with enslaved Africans building a wall in 1653 to protect Dutch settlers from Indian raids, quote unquote, according to the route. This walkway and wooden fence made up of pointed logs and running between the rivers, they became known as Wall Street, the home of global finance. History has recorded that enslaved and free Africans were largely responsible for the construction of the early city, New York City. African construction workers cleared land, built a fort, mills, bridges, stone houses, the first city hall, the docks, and the city prison. Today, 156 years after the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, African Americans are free but still unequal. Now, I want all of you to have a copy of this here. because I talked to many of our African brothers and sisters in Harlem who never quite go to Wall Street, which is where the same island. It's not an accident that Africa, that was the commerce center. We picked the cotton in the South and processed it in Montgomery, sold out of Wall Street in New York. The real rich people were the ship owners. They're the ones who were in importing Africans and exporting cotton and tobacco. They're the ones who laid the foundation for funding Columbia, right, and Harvard and Yale and Princeton. That's where that money came from. So let's get that down. So have that little piece down. So as we talk our African talk, we can get that piece down. Second, I want Dr. Pleasant to stand. Dr. Pleasant, please stand. Now, he looked like an ordinary African. He's not ordinary, brothers. Doctor, you went to Clemson? Yes, sir. What else you do?
Benedict College, undergrad, Clemson University, undergrad, Clark Atlanta University, MBA, and Georgia Tech, PhD.
Now, it's about the PhD. Tell a little bit. He's a football player from Clemson.
Yes, sir. I'm very happy right now.
What else you do, man? Tell it.
I've just been appointed
I mean, you're the first black to get that PhD.
first African American to get a PhD from Georgia Tech in business and the history of business.
Now, the reason I want them to stand for one is that one of the challenges we have today, Doctor, we don't know each other. Say a few people who know each other have more power than many strangers. A few people who know each other have more power than many strangers. There was a time we could say, well, we're going to meet at Dookie Chase in New Orleans, Gaston in Birmingham, Pascal's or Beeman's in Atlanta, Simpson's in Washington, and Red Rooster in New York. There was a sense of who we were. We lost that sense of identity of the corners. And one reason I want Dr. Pleasant, I asked him to get his class. There's a big stadium in Atlanta now. I want to talk a little bit about that's going to be one of our workshops tomorrow. It's Life Beyond the Playing Field. See, in the science of capital, and we'll get into how this thing is, the gap has gotten so wide. Someone said, you can never catch up with these stadiums and stuff because you never had that kind of money. So you don't need money to build stadiums. If someone said to me, they said, Jess Jackson, you own the New York Giants. 32 men who own teams they'll decide who they let in. So if I get the next franchise, I take that piece of paper, not a dime, with the 4 or 5 different males competing for my franchise, Johnnetta. And then the advertising will kick in, right? And then the pension funds kick in, right? And so you turn a letter of intent into a multi-billion, and then citizens start giving away land. Doc, talk a little bit about building a stadium. He's gotten his class in Clark, Atlanta. They're now studying how to build. If you take over the city and become mayor, become a congressman, do not know how the finances work, you just be residing over somebody else's wealth. Come over here, Dr. Pleasant. Tell us about how to do that. Yeah, tell us how to do that.
Thank you. Good morning. How's everybody? Good. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
PhD from Georgia Tech, football player. Georgia Tech. Now, he's teaching in Clark, Atlanta because he's the first African American. Get a PhD in business, Georgia Tech, but they didn't hire him. He's teaching in Clark, Atlanta. Which I'm glad he's there, but on the logical sense, he should be teaching where he got the PhD. Don't you think that? Go on, man. Talk about
Yeah, it has been very interesting. I began to pursue this under the direction of Reverend Jackson. And believe it or not, I made a couple of calls to the Falcons, and they gave me an inward path to find out about the entire process. I was actually very shocked, and I knew it was only the divine providence of God that door was opened up so that we could learn the knowledge and the way that they did it. And believe it or not, they gave me every step, everything they did from the concept of that stadium to the actual day when they cut the ribbon. They shared it with us. We took our sports and entertainment management students down. We're going to go back again next month and meet with them again, and it was quite interesting. But I'll tell you this, it is amazing to me as we began to understand the process exactly what took place. First, Art Blank is a very, very intelligent guy, very charismatic guy. He sold the concept and the vision of that stadium to everybody in Atlanta. So everybody got excited. Now, for the African-American community, we got excited because we were going to get to sit down in a new, very fancy stadium. And the excitement pretty much didn't go beyond that point. And for everybody else, everybody started putting in bids to try to get a piece of the business. But then as we began to uncover this process, we began to see how they only invited certain people to the table to get a piece of the business. And then, as you know, what happened, what they always do, they came in and they started chipping away at land and ownership of the space around that place. Absolutely. Two very prominent African-American churches who had been there from the beginning of our historical HBCU times, Morehouse College, Spelman College, and those places, they fought and they tried to take a stand to protect that building. But then those who were in place in Atlanta to protect those properties gave it up and would not protect those properties because they did some backdoor stuff to make sure they were influenced to give up their property in our history of our churches and our HBCU's foundation.
Friendship Church.
Yes, and so then as that went forward, we were promised, we were given a certain price of what it would cost. And I wasn't a great mathematician. My undergraduate degree is in physics, and I am pretty, can add a little bit. I knew there's no way in the world in 2016 and 17 and 18 you're going to build a dome of that stature for that price that was there. That price was given just to get you excited because we went from a few $100 million to now over 1.3 to 1.4, ended up true cost around $1.6 billion. So then what happened as we were beginning to investigate this process, we now see all the people who were involved in it. And you won't believe this. What they did, they started having these galas. They started having private galas that we were never invited to the table to have a part in. They began to get contractors, mass contractors in. They began to get underwriters in. Ready for this? From insurance companies, ladies and gentlemen. And guess who the number one people that pay premiums for insurance companies? We do. So guess what happens? Those underwriters and those insurance companies gave bonds, they gave all kind of writings, and they wrote this thing and supported this thing. And therefore, when they maxed out on that, then they said, okay, now we're still a little bit short. So they went again to some of our brothers in these positions in downtown in Atlanta and said, what can we do to make this work? So the brothers, instead of standing up and protecting our communities and making sure we getting taken, they started raising up taxes in the city of Atlanta to reach that. They start not only that, for example, when I drive through Atlanta, I used to be able to park and the meter was there and it was an hour, then the meter went down to 30 minutes. And how many of you know as soon as you put it in there, but by the time you get back, that 30 minutes is over? Does anybody understand what I'm saying? So then all of a sudden the ticket starts getting writing, the car starts getting towed, and all of a sudden what is supposed to be a 10-minute trip for, for me to have some fun turns into a $200 exploration. Can I get an amen in this place? That's right. Yes, I should. And let me tell you, we watch this process. But again, we're sitting in here, Reverend, with these people, and they're telling us this whole process of how they did this thing. And through all of those different means and ways of doing this, and the next thing you know, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta is there without us having a chance to get an economic piece of the pie. And it is amazing to me and shocking to me that those of us that we elect to put in these positions to protect us, to help us rise to an economic place of prosperity, they will sell out for a dinner and a meal and a few little season tickets, y'all ain't talking to me, and a front seat at the Super Bowl, y'all ain't hearing me now, and then we suffer for that in the long term as those that have already been on top continue to rise as they take their long hands and hold us down. That's pretty much it, Reverend.
Yeah, look here. Say greed and growth do not go hand in hand. Ethnicity is important. Ethnicity is important. Ethics is more important. See, because it's like some of the officials use eminent domain to take that property. Same thing happened. They didn't only snatch us from Africa. We also got some soul. Museveni says, "Don't y'all come over talking crazy." So some of them old crooked chief soul y'all too. It's a lot. Say ethics matter. Greed matters. Effort and excellence and hard work matters. Inheritance and access matters more. Effort and excellence matters. Inheritance and access matters more. So we're dealing with two sets of rules. You can become the mayor of a given city because you're popular. That does not mean you understand the science of finance.
That's right.
You can become a congressman because you got a good advertising campaign. Does not mean you understand about congressional regulations. And so that's why at this stage about it, we're now, doubling back, Johnnetta, teaching those who are in position of response. The reason why Percy Sutton was determined to get the Joint Center for Political Education, he said at the end of when we came out of slavery, we had the power to elect each other, but we didn't have the power of information. So we got corrupted and we got jammed in jail. Some of that's happening again today, not knowing how to maneuver. And so we meeting with some of the athletes this past week, and I was down in Charlotte, not to watch the ball game, but talk to these young athletes who have these millions and fooling the money to do what? They don't get along. They part ways, don't they? And so I said to him, why would you need? How many weeks do you travel a year? They said, well, Reverend, the season lasts 6 months. We train 2 months. We travel 2 months, 10 months. I said, why do you need a $400,000 car? And you ain't home for 2 months.
Right.
I mean, explain why? If LeBron James puts on a suit from J.C. Penney, it looks like it costs $1 million. The worth is in him, not in the suit. That's why you get a $5,000 suit and a $400,000 car, and you mostly wear shorts. Your real suit is short with numbers on them. What is $5,000 suit for? Y'all talk to me. I'm trying to make sense of y'all up in here today. And as we deal on this narrative question, and I'm gonna wrap up because I said I get my signals from John, is that I want to revisit, and I want us to should have a copy for everybody, a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, because that is the Bible. That's the Bible verse for us, for God in intersected history, with our own effort. See, we saved Lincoln and the Union. Lincoln and the Union freed us. If we had not saved the Union and Jefferson Davis had won, there'd be 2 U.S. of America now. Right? And they would say secession, sedition, segregation, and slavery. Last point, before I ask 1 or 2 questions from the audience here, is that, Dr. Cole, the Jefferson Davis Democrats ruled the South. Wallace and all those guys were Democrats. When we got the right to vote, they shifted parties. So Jefferson Davis, Democrats became Goldwater, Reagan, Republicans. Lincoln, Republicans became Johnson, Kennedy, King, Democrats. That shift took place. Am I right about that, Barbara? Yes. And so nothing has changed but uniform. That's why the South is still so racist until you got folk today who, and we must never miss signals. So there is no such bill as Obamacare. There's a bill called Affordable Health Care. If they put on the face of the bill, Obama don't throw darts. They kill the bill to throw darts in the face. You hear me, Don? Yeah. So that so there's no such bill.
There's no such bill.
So much so until I talked to some people in Kentucky, They were dead set against Obamacare. I mean, they wanted affordable health care. They really didn't want Obamacare. They wanted kids on insurance till 26, wanted mammograms, wanted pre-existing conditions exam. Say if I want affordable health care, I don't want Obamacare, I want omelet without the eggs. Y'all, am I making sense to y'all right?
Yeah, you making sense.
Am I getting through to you? Yeah, say something. Yeah, another African. You be on MSNBC with the white people. Talk to me.
Just wanted and appreciate everything everyone had to say, and greetings to you all and to our esteemed guests in the audience, Dr. Malvo
Mark
and Dr.
Thompson,
Albright.
y'all.
Just as we were talking about this and I was listening to Dr. Cole and Dr. Daniels, just want to alert you all something. How many of you all see Malcolm Nance on MSNBC with us sometimes? The security expert? Yeah, Malcolm. So we've been working together with a group of people. I've already briefed Dr. Daniels in the context of what we're dealing with as black people and African-American people and all of that. The Russians are targeting us again. And as I was saying to Dr. Daniels, they target us more than anyone because our votes are so important. And so there's a hashtag going around, I think Dr. Malvo's aware of this too, a hashtag going around on Twitter and on social media. It's two of them. One is DOS, and the other one is American DOS, and it's relevant to our conversation today. DOS stands for Descendants of Slaves, Gigi. What they're doing is saying that if you are not a descendant of American slaves, you are not a legitimate black person. They are attacking Pan-Africanism, everything we talked about today. They don't want anything to do with Africans in the diaspora. And they're using it specifically against a specific candidate. I know we're nonpartisan right now, but it's a specific candidate they're using against. I won't say her name, but you all probably know what I'm talking about. So I think people need to be aware of that. And as Ron was saying, some of our young people and other people are susceptible.
You're talking to Maxine Waters because she makes sense.
Because they don't know the history.
So they're targeting
They're targeting
Maxine Waters because she makes real sense.
Because she makes real sense. But I'm actually talking about a presidential candidate that they're specifically targeting right now. And some of our people are susceptible to this. And just yesterday, Ron, we haven't talked since Sunday. There's a black, see, a lot of these images we see on Facebook and Twitter aren't real people. We see a picture of a black person. We just got a black woman face on Twitter banned on yesterday because she wasn't really a black woman. She was a dude in Singapore pushing, a so-called black agenda, American descendants of slaves. They don't want reparations for anybody else in the African world, in the Caribbean, or anywhere else. They just want to push this agenda. So just be very, very careful in this 400th year. When you see this conversation of that hashtag, be aware and clear. I mean, we're all intelligent folk in this room. We have to speak to our communities and young people around, let them know that this ain't really, they're all Trump supporters. Because if you read some of the tweets and look at it deeply, they start talking about how good Trump is. What I don't get, though, about us is a lot of them have in their profile a little icon, a little emoticon of the American flag. That ought to be a giveaway anyway, But I just wanted to share that with you all to be aware. Thank you.
Let's stand together. Let's stand. We're going to the New York Ballroom West where the box lunches are being served. Huh? Oh, y'all sit back down there. This y'all too movement done messed me up.
Oh, I forgot something. The video that explains this is I'm about to post on my Twitter right now, so you can see it. It'll be right there at the top. Twitter.com/makeitplain. Shireen Mitchell, Malcolm Nance. You can see the video. It explains this bodiism in the black community. Thank you. Twitter.com.
Now the reason why, as we sit down, getting this history stuff, say if the whole room were pitch dark, someone lit one candle would challenge all the darkness. Now what I'm trying to say is that a handful of us getting this narrative straight, have the power to light up the whole world. We got the two deputies here from South Africa. South Africa is in the house. Mississippi is in the house. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank Thee for allowing us to make this journey. 20 years of much struggling and suffering and sacrifice and delivery. Thank You for empowering us today to come from low places now to be in high places. Let us use our vision, our courage, and our integrity to help those who would come on and thank those who paved the way. Amen.